When the heart is weighed against a feather, eternity holds its breath. When the breath leaves the body and silence becomes heavier than flesh, what remains of a man? To the ancient Egyptians, this question was not mystery, but map. They charted the unseen world, not with speculation, but with scripture. And from that sacred cartography rose the scrolls and spells, the hymns and invocations that we call the Book of the Dead, a name modern and foreign to their tongue, yet close enough in soul to what it truly was: a guide for the departed, a compass for the spirit, a passage through eternity. To live in ancient Egypt was to live preparing for death, not in fear, but in reverence. For death was not an end, but a transformation, a journey that began with the closing of the eyes and continued across rivers of fire, fields of stars, and gates guarded by names too sacred to speak. The tomb was not merely a resting place. It was a launch, a vessel to carry the soul into a realm more vast, more consequential than any lived under the sun. The Ka, the Ba, the shadow, the name. Fragments of the self that had to be preserved, protected, and guided. The body was mummified, wrapped not just in linen, but in spell, in prayer, in sacred geometry. Within the tomb, painted on walls or inscribed on papyrus, were the words meant to lead the soul: hymns to Ra, prayers to Osiris, passwords to pass the gatekeepers of the Duat. This was no vague afterlife, and it was not guaranteed. When the soul awoke in the land of the dead, it did not rise freely. It was greeted by darkness and doubt, by beings neither hostile nor kind, but watchful, judicial. The soul had to move through the Duat, the shadow realm, part underworld and part cosmic riddle, where stars were souls and time moved like a serpent circling itself. The sun itself traveled here each night, Ra descending in his solar bark, to battle the serpent, Apophis, and to be reborn at dawn. The soul, too, would descend, and must prove itself worthy to rise again. The spells were not incantations of power, but invocations of memory. They reminded the soul of its origins, of its purpose, and of its identity in the face of oblivion. I have not stolen, says the soul. These are not merely moral declarations, but keys to doors that only truth can open. For in the hall of Mat there is a weighing, and the heart, the seat of thought and feeling, is placed on the scale. Opposite it lies the feather of Mat, the principle of order, truth, and divine justice. If the heart is heavier, if it is swollen with falsehood, it is devoured by Amit, the soul eater, a monstrous creature, part lion, part crocodile, part hippopotamus. To be devoured is to cease, not to suffer, but to vanish. No torment, no trial, only silence. But if the heart is light, if it has remained in harmony with Mat, then the soul is declared true of voice, justified, and may pass into the field of reeds. This paradise was not abstract. It was real, lush, an idealized version of Egypt's fertile lands. There, the soul would work not in toil, but in joy, harvesting crops in an eternal cycle of harmony. No hunger gnawed, no death lingered. The family would reunite. The gods would walk among men. But even paradise was not permanent without remembrance. The name must be spoken on earth. The tomb must be visited. The soul's presence must be fed through ritual, offering, and invocation. To be forgotten was to die again. Thus, the Book of The dead was not only a map for the soul, but a dialogue between the living and the dead. It reminded both that the boundary between worlds was not impenetrable. The tomb walls bore images not of grief, but of transformation's solar boats sailing through flame, gods holding ankhs over the deceased, lions guarding thresholds of dawn. It was not a book of death, but of transcendence. To the Egyptian mind, death was the narrow gate through which eternity poured. Each copy of the Book of the Dead was unique, tailored to the individual's name, titles, and life. The soul of the deceased would speak these spells aloud, or the gods would read them on the soul's behalf. Words had power. Names had presence. Silence was danger. To speak the right phrase at the right threshold could mean the difference between ascension and annihilation. The journey was full of trials, gates with secret names, guardians who asked riddles, lakes, a fire that only the pure could cross. The soul had to transform, to assume the forms of gods and animals, to fly as a falcon, swim as a fish, rise as a lotus. In each spell, identity dissolved and reformed, a constant becoming. This was no static eternity. It was a cosmic cycle, a dance between death and light, chaos and harmony. Ra and Thoth. At the heart of it all stood Osiris, the green-skinned god of resurrection. Once a king, betrayed and dismembered by his brother Set, in him the soul saw its mirror, to die, to be torn, to be remembered, to be made whole, and to rise. Osiris was not a symbol. He was the path itself. Every soul that passed into the Duat stood before him, not merely judged, but welcomed, if worthy, into the company of the justified. But justification was not given freely. It was earned through the balance of a lifetime and the strength of a death well prepared. That is why the Book of the Dead was so vital. It was a manual of identity. The soul had to remember who it was, even as memory slipped away in the shifting sands of the beyond. Each spell, each chapter, was a light in the darkness, a voice in the silence, a lifeline in the abyss. Among the most famous spells was the weighing of the heart, but there were others just as crucial. Spells to avoid snares, to repel crocodiles, to breathe air in the realm of the dead, to open the mouth, to prevent the soul from dying a second time. There were spells to allow the soul to sail with Ra, to pass unharmed through fire, to eat bread among the gods. These were not superstitions. They were assurances that the soul could maintain integrity in a realm where form was unstable and identity easily lost. The soul's journey was not solitary. It was surrounded by divine forces. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe who recorded the verdict, Anubis, jackal-headed guardian of the dead, who ensured the purity of the heart. Horus, who guided the soul across the waters. Mat herself, with wings outstretched, reminding the cosmos of its order. Each god had a role, not just in myth, but in function. The dead needed allies. They needed recognition, but deeply understood. It reveals a civilization obsessed not with mortality, but with what lies beyond it. And in doing so, it reflects something deeply human, the refusal to accept that the self ends with the body, the belief that memory, justice, and truth must echo beyond the grave. The scrolls are faded now. The tombs are silent, but the words remain. And in their rhythm, in their invocation, we hear not the terror of extinction, but the majesty of continuation. The soul was meant to rise, not merely to survive, but to be transformed into something eternal, radiant, divine. In the field of reeds, the soul who has passed all trials walks again beneath a golden sky. Birds sing, waters flow. Time is no longer a river, but a circle. The soul looks back, not in sorrow, but in triumph. And from the land of the living, when the name is spoken, a wind stirs the reeds. The journey continues.